We actually did a study with LinkedIn that shows that the older individuals, 50 plus, are actually upskilling at an incredibly fast rate. We can't afford to just stay relevant. We actually need to move ahead. And we're showing that we can do that. We're in this second phase of our lives where we have so much experience and wisdom. We're showing an interest, and we're using technology in every facet of our lives, and we're upskilling faster than other generations because we know that there's a gap.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. So about an hour after I turned 50 years old, I got a piece of mail. 2, actually. The first was from my mom wishing me a happy birthday. She's really good with the cards. And the second was from AARP, inviting me to become a member. As long as I have been alive, I have known of AARP as synonymous with having power and agency in our culture as you grow older. And recently, I had the opportunity to have its new leader into our studio. Her name is Dr. Myechia Minter-Jordan, and her own nonlinear career has taught us a lot about navigating the long arc of working life. She joined me here in the studio to talk about ageism, AI, and what it means not to just stay relevant, but to stay competitive in the second half of our lives. This episode was originally recorded live and broadcast to Premium members, so you're going to catch some questions from folks who were there. If you're a LinkedIn Premium member, you can see the extended version of the conversation at the link in the show notes. Here's Dr. Minter-Jordan. So you have this line, if we're lucky, we're aging.
Yes.
I think a lot of people listening would say, well, sure, in theory, but in practice, my LinkedIn inbox seems to have gone quiet after 50. What's the gap that you see between the story we tell about experience and what people are actually feeling out there?
So I would say the gap is, it's harder now. When you are in your 50s, and many of us are displaced out of our roles, we're looking for roles that had the same salary as the salary that we had before. And it is more challenging, but it's not impossible. And what I'm really excited about is that there's this new opportunity, particularly with the changing demographics of our country and of the world, that more and more people are aging into this 50 plus, right? And 50 plus individuals bring experience, they bring the soft skills that other generations don't necessarily have. And that opens up opportunity for new jobs, new applications of those soft skills in different ways. And there are different things that we can do to optimize that. But I think the biggest headline is that there is opportunity for us, and we're living longer, and we're staying in the workforce longer. And when we are displaced, there are ways to get back into the workforce that really leverage the soft skills that we've gained through our experience as well.
I think that is really something that I want to dig into while we're together today. You know, you went back to business school in your 30s while practicing medicine. I want to ask you the question that I think a lot of people are asking themselves right now. How did you know at that moment in your career that it was worth it to make a big pivot and to put the time investment and economic investment into it?
So for me, it was knowing that I didn't know something and knowing that I was a great physician and knew how to practice medicine, but I didn't know anything about the business of medicine. And so I went back in order to give myself additional skills and expertise. I also figured out that the decisions that were being made at the hospital that I worked at required other skills and expertise that I just didn't have. Being a great doctor wasn't going to help me understand how to create a medical consultation service, which is what I ultimately wound up doing. And most people would say, you're already a doctor, why do you need to go back and get more school, more training? But it was understanding that there was a gap in my knowledge and I needed to fill that gap. And it was really exciting for me to say, I can stretch myself in this way and learn about the business of medicine and apply that to becoming an even better doctor.
You saw what you would love to do in the future, and you saw a path to get there. How much of what you saw in the future ended up being what you did in the future?
Oh, it was very different.
Yeah.
And what I think it reflects is that nothing is linear. And you make these decisions about, I need to understand this, and then you try to figure out, how do I take these skills and this experience and apply it to something else? Some of that is opportunities, a lot of that is preparing, but it's also recognizing that skills from one area of your life and of your career journey can be used in another. Yeah. And how do you start to understand what doors that opens up for you? And so I went back to understand the business of medicine, and then I realized that those skills that I gained through my MBA that allowed me to do more, make more decisions and participate in healthcare administration. And that took me on a different path. But I never thought when I went to medical school that I would eventually stop practicing and move on to a different path.
Yeah, and here we are.
Here we are
and
in a totally different space.
Paths. I know. Okay, I want to bring in some questions from the audience. And
Sure.
some of y'all actually sent in questions in advance on video. Let's cut to our first video question from the audience. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Heather. I am in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have more than 10 years of experience in nonprofits, as well as higher education like colleges and universities. I have been on countless job interviews and haven't received callbacks. I'm concerned that potential employers view my experience as a risk rather than an advantage. How can I position myself so that my experience is seen as an asset rather than a liability?
Thank you, Heather, for that question. And that sentiment that you raised, Heather, this I'm not getting callback sentiment, that's one we hear a lot. I'm curious what you might have as advice for Heather.
Yeah, Heather, I'm so grateful that you asked the question. And I've seen this very experience that you're having play out with colleagues of mine. Part of what I think might be helpful, and there's no sort of one right answer, is thinking about how you might reframe your experience to be applicable to the jobs that you're applying. And you may or have already attempted to do that. But these soft skills, I call it sort of the rise of the soft skills. Yeah. Being able to give concrete examples of how some of the skills that you've gained throughout your career can apply to the new job that you're looking at. The other thing that I would say, which is always helpful, and I did a lot of when I was in between opportunities and looking for the ways in which I could apply my skill set to my next job, was intensifying my networking and really being able to talk to people in different spaces and fields to say, as I go out on this interview with this organization, tapping into someone who may be in that space and talking with them about what would strengthen my candidacy for this role, and describing those soft skills, and then really being creative as to how they then could complement the role that you're looking for. So it's a combination of elevating the soft skills and the ways in which older individuals can apply them, particularly now with AI disintermediation, I think is critically important. And combining that with networking to make sure that as you're crafting your response in these job interviews, that you're really speaking to what the employer wants, leveraging those skills that you already have.
I love that you land on the networking piece. It was the first thought that I had for Heather. Curious, have you learned anything about how to network well?
You know, what I learned is moving out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And when I was in between, I had left one opportunity and I was looking for my next, I really tapped into different parts of my network that I may not have thought about. And so I talked to people in education, I talked to people in philanthropy, I talked to people in nonprofit, I talked to people in private equity, just to let them know that I was looking, to let them know about my skills. And what wound up happening is from one of those conversations, that's actually how I got the job that I have now. I
love hearing that because I think so often we apply and we don't hear back. And when you step out of that approach and into an approach where you are just putting yourself into conversation after conversation, the mechanics of the relationships work differently, I think.
They do, and you're top of mind for people. You obviously have to make sure that networking interaction is reflective of your strengths, that you're really coming into that conversation with confidence. You're saying, I'm thinking about these things. Does that sound right? So framing your questions right is appropriate. And then you will be top of mind. So I was top of mind when the colleague that I spoke with heard about the role that I have now as CEO of AARP and said, I know someone who's interested in this type of role. She would be perfect. And he referred me, and that's how I got the role.
I love hearing that. I want to bring another video question into this conversation. So let's roll.
I know you've spoken extensively on ageism. One of the places I see this backfiring on corporate America at the moment is this exodus of really seasoned, knowledgeable workers, particularly women, who are opting out of corporate America and starting a second act career, whether it's consulting, coaching, entrepreneurship. I would love your perspective on the impact this is having to corporate America, whether this folks in the C-suite are identifying this as a key risk factor at this point. And 3, what can corporate America or corporate leaders do to change this trajectory?
That's Jenna in Philadelphia bringing us a question that frames such an important topic. I'm curious what you think.
Ageism is something that we are combating every day in all that we do at AARP. And I do believe that this is a unique time for the 50 plus individuals in our country to leverage their soft skills, to leverage their experience, and to be able to continue to elevate the value that they bring to the workplace. This is the first time that we've ever had 5 generations in the workplace. And so as a worker, as an employee, making sure that you're stepping into those roles and spaces around mentorship in the workplace and really demonstrating how you're bringing that experience and wisdom to these multi-generational workforce teams, as an example. I do think that there's an opportunity now, particularly with AI disintermediation, for corporate America to step up and to understand that we need more flexible policies that would help keep people in the workforce.
Yeah.
One of the ways in which AARP is doing that is that we offer family caregiving policies. We offer family caregiving leave that allows for people to take the time that they need to balance family caregiving responsibilities with their work. And so we do need, as corporate America, we do need to make sure that we are creating the right policies to keep people within the workforce, because often people leave, particularly women, because of family caregiving responsibilities.
Yeah.
So understanding that, understanding your workforce and what your workforce needs and adapting policies. And we are beginning to see some traction. We work with companies around the country to help them guide them in terms of the way in which they think about policy and to be an example and role model to them as well. But they are seeing that this is happening. I would say that there's a real opportunity for us as the 50 plus to step into this role and to make sure that we are demonstrating our value in the workplace as 50 plus individuals.
Okay, you mentioned right at the beginning of your answer this idea that mentoring was important.
Yes.
And that just jumped out to me because one thing that I just notice around me is that as people sometimes feel less important in a workforce, they stop feeling like they even have something to offer. They step back from mentoring instead of stepping toward it. And
Yes.
I'm curious how we all should be thinking, regardless of our role, how we all should be thinking about mentoring.
Right. I think mentoring is one of those ways in which you can actually solidify and strengthen your value as an employee.
Yeah.
And being concrete about that and talking about that with your managers. I was working with, ex-employee to help them do this project. Like, we need to claim that space. We need to claim the value that we bring. Mentoring is certainly one way to do that. Hosting mentoring events, starting a mentoring employee resource group, hosting networking events, like really stepping into the wisdom and expertise that the 50 plus worker or employee has and leveraging that and making it seen within the workplace. When we step back from it, no one's going to ask us to do it. So we actually have to step into those roles and show that we are stepping into those roles through the work that we do and in those conversations with management.
In some ways, when you step up as a mentor, you are branding that wisdom. You are branding yourself
That's
as
right.
a person with that wisdom. And so you are teaching the world how to see you.
Exactly. And teaching the world how to value the expertise that the 50 plus worker brings to the workplace.
Yeah.
There's so much that we have experienced throughout our career journey. Again, those soft skills are incredibly important. Being able to manage teams and speaking to that, even if you're looking for a job, speaking to all of that experience of team management, team culture. Organizations now are really working on, how do I strengthen the culture? How do I make sure that my teams are most effective? And I believe that the 50 plus employee can play a significant role in leading that.
Listen, I want to spend some time talking about how we stay relevant in this moment of AI reshaping. And I shy away from the term stay relevant because I think that it takes away from the gifts that we actually have to impart. But we need to figure out how to talk about them differently and how to identify the ones that matter most. There's a narrative right now that says the young will adapt, the older workforce, they're going to struggle. I want you to complicate that for me.
What I would say is the older workforce, and we actually did a study with LinkedIn that shows that the older individuals, 50 plus, are actually upskilling at an incredibly fast rate. And so it's not enough, to your point, to sort of, I want to stay relevant. It's how do you make sure that you are moving at the pace that your colleagues of their generations or the workforce is moving. And we're showing that we can do that. We're showing an interest and we're using technology in every facet of our lives. And we're upskilling faster than other generations because we know that there's a gap.
Right.
And so continuing to upskill, continuing to take that AI class, use AI in your daily life, I've created my own agent, like really working diligently to understand how is technology reshaping the workforce and staying abreast of that. We can't afford to just stay relevant. We actually need to move ahead. And we have the ability to do that. We're in this second phase of our lives where we have so much experience and wisdom, and we can apply that to leveraging these tools to do what we need them to do to make us even stronger as candidates for jobs.
Okay, that final point, that is what I think the 50-plus workforce brings, right?
Yes.
It's not enough to be able to be really great at using the tool.
Mm-hmm.
It is also imperative that we figure out where the tool belongs
Yes.
in our workflow.
That's right.
It
That's
comes
right.
back to understanding what the business case is for any work that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the more experience that you have, the more you're often, not always, able to step back and identify that.
Exactly. And that's what employers are looking for as we're, investing, millions of dollars into leveraging these AI tools and resources. Understanding how best to make it effective in the workplace is something that only comes with wisdom and expertise because you knew the process before.
Yep.
And now as you're leveraging AI to make that process more effective and efficient, you as that worker, as that employee can identify where it goes and demonstrate even greater value to your employer.
Okay, so Dr. Minter-Jordan, I want to talk a second about your own career path again when it comes to this topic, because you've stayed at the front edge of your own field, even as it's changed, and now for more than 30 years. And that was medicine, but then community health, and then innovation, and now longevity.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a practice of staying relevant?
I wouldn't say it's a practice, but I think I have an innate curiosity. And I have, I was an athlete, so I'm a fierce competitor.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be left behind. And I don't feel as if my age, it would be a barrier to me learning new skills, taking on new skills. I'm one that I don't want the tech person to come and help me. I want to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
And I was one of the early adopters of AI in terms of the workplace. On my team, I like to tease the younger folks on my team about that. But I do think like taking charge and feeling as if you are in control, because we are. And we have, at this stage in our lives, we have a different level of confidence, a different level of experience that allows us to say, I can do this, and put ourselves out there in a way where we've done that before, we've seen some things, and we can now say, I can do this and get the skills and the talent that I need to take myself even further. So I've never sort of set back. I've always been one to like, what else is out there for me, and how do I go and get it? And let me go and get it.
I love that you point out your background and experience as an athlete and shaping your practice.
That's right. That's right. I think as an athlete and also as a physician, I think the way that I think, the way that I triage situations comes from my background as a physician. So even though I'm not practicing medicine anymore, I'm applying that way of thinking to the work that I do. So when I'm hearing an issue at work, I want to understand what are the key points that I need to know in order to make a decision. And then I'm prioritizing that in my mind. I'm triaging in my mind about, all right, what are the things that we need to do, and making sure that I am coming up with a plan of action that's reflective and using the skills that I learned as a physician.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so AARP put out the report on the $1 trillion caregiving economy.
Yes.
A huge chunk of that work is being done by people who are also trying to stay in the workforce, stay current, stay employable. How do we have an honest conversation about this?
Yes, well, I think we start with facts. There are 63 million caregivers out there, the majority of whom are over the age of 50. To your point, that 63 million generates $1 trillion in care, unpaid care, that's being delivered to their loved ones, to people that they care for. And they're balancing work and this life of their own life, as well as taking care of others. And so understanding the facts first and foremost, and then as we think about employers, if these are the facts, you likely have a significant number of caregivers on your teams as part of your staff. And so how do we as employers ensure that we have the right policies in place that provide support so that I can make sure that my employee can contribute effectively and still manage the work-life balance? And so there's a critical opportunity for employers to understand that, for healthcare systems to understand that. We're fighting for legislation, whether or not that's tax credits, the integration of the caregiver in the care plan from the AARP policy standpoint. And I think it's a wake-up call to employers at the same time. We shouldn't be afraid as caregivers to say, I need time to be able to take care of my loved one,
Yeah.
or I have this responsibility, and worry about whether or not we're going to keep our job. And that's what we're fighting up against. But the more and more voices we have, the more stories we can tell, the more we can talk about how important it is to have that balance, we will begin to see businesses shift, because ultimately they want to be able to meet their bottom line. And you can't do that if you're not supporting the employees that will help you to get there.
That is so true. Okay, I want to bring our audience into this conversation again. This one comes from Sandeep in the United Arab Emirates. And this is about staying ahead.
Mhm.
How can mid and late career professionals practically stay ahead of AI-driven changes without feeling overwhelmed? I can't believe that this is the first time we've used the word overwhelm in this conversation.
Yes, that's a great way to describe what can happen. And I think, the way that I would approach it is starting small, starting to understand, how can I leverage AI in my day-to-day tasks, Sandeep? How do I understand what are the most practical applications to my field in AI, and start to take training courses? There are tons of courses out there that are free, that are available, even if you can ask AI to teach you how to use AI. I mean, which is really incredible. And you can leverage the prompt to say, this is my specific role, what should I be thinking about? So it's actually interesting that we can use the same tool to help teach us how to use it, which is very different than other technologies in the past. But I would say start small and be consistent, and continue to focus on the relevant use to the work that you're in. Because when you think about it in totality, it does and can be overwhelming, but it's really about understanding what are the most practical applications for me in my role, in the work that I'm doing or that I would like to do.
Okay, so this question is a popular question. A lot of people are asking different forms of it. It concerns resume advice. But I will ask it directly from Christian in New York. Thank you for sharing it. Should we make efforts to de-age our CV and job applications, even though it may sell ourselves short?
So, Christian, I think at first I'd want to understand what we mean by de-age. And if you mean by sort of removing dates, I don't know. I don't know that that's going to be as effective as focusing on what are your strengths and highlighting those strengths. We've talked a lot about soft skills, highlighting those soft skills, highlighting the data, the things that you've been able to deliver. And what we should do, I would say, for any job that we are evaluating is ensure that our resume reflects the job description.
Yeah.
Many of us will go with the same resume to every job, and we actually need to modify that resume so that it really speaks to what this job is looking for. And I think that goes beyond de-aging. It's really about, do I see as an employer, do I see that what this candidate represents is a match with what I'm looking for? And if you can highlight that, if you can have a better understanding of that and make sure that it's reflective in your resume, in your interest letter, those are the things that I think will go a lot further than de-aging.
That is a wonderful point. So I want to talk some about pivots. When you look back at the move from practicing medicine to going back for the MBA, what do you wish someone had told you right at the front of that? And I reference that only because it appears to be your first big pivot in your career.
If I were to give advice to someone else, what I would say is, don't be afraid to see where your gaps are and try to fill them. And often we don't, and don't be complacent. Often we sort of sit back and say, I finished medical school. Well, what else do I need to do? But if you know that you can't do the work that you'd like to do, or that you see a knowledge gap, it's on us to fill it. And so I would say that, and that's what I did. I saw that I didn't understand the business of medicine, and that's why I went back to business school. It wasn't because it was recommended, it was because I was like, I need to understand this better. If I want to be more effective as a physician in running the programs that the hospital wanted me to run at the time, I need to have a different skill set and a different understanding of how to read a balance sheet, how to create a business case. And I learned that from my business school experience. And so I would give the advice of, really critically look at where you need to fill those gaps and figure out how to do that. And you can only do that for yourself. You can't expect your employer to do that for you. You actually have to do that for yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people listening are trying to read the signals right now. Jobs are changing, our industries are often changing, and we're trying to figure out, is this the moment to make a move? Should I dig in and wait and watch? When you have been at points like that yourself, how have you made decisions around timing?
I think you have to be incredibly strategic. I think you have to weigh what are the responsibilities that you have. If you are someone who has children, small children, taking care of a loved one, you may think differently about the risk that you're willing to take. It shouldn't make you risk averse, but it should make you think about the risk.
Yeah.
And rather than, there may be instances where you say, this job is just not right for me. I need to step out and do something different. There may be times where you say, it's not right for me, so now I need to network. And I need to set a plan about how I network, and I need to push myself to network. And so there are different approaches, but I do think the advice that I would give is be strategic, and don't make rash decisions when you're thinking about your career and your career choices. Really be strategic and think through what your plan will be of understanding where you want to go next. And as we talked about and you led with, careers are no longer linear.
Yeah.
And it's okay to take risks, but I would say just be strategic as you think about how much risk you're willing to take.
Yeah. Great advice. Okay, so you have talked about building a fulfilling aging experience.
Yes.
Across the whole arc of a life, not just starting at 50. So if we have a 35-year-old in the audience listening, which I know at least one who is, what advice might you give them to set them up at that point for a career of longevity?
The great news is that we're living longer and we're working longer. Many of us because we want to, some of us because we have to. Yeah. And so work doesn't end for many of us when you hit 50 or 55. It actually is just the second phase of life. And so every chapter has meaning and should teach you lessons about what you'd like to apply to the next chapter. So really taking stock, no matter what age you are, of what job you're in now, what you'd like to do next, understanding where you can fill in your skills and fill in those knowledge gaps, and really imagining what you want to be, and knowing that there's no linear path to get there or what you want to do ultimately. But I think there's so much excitement in thinking about each chapter. People aren't staying in jobs for the same period. My parents were career, that I'm in this job for 30, 40 years. That's not the case today. And so each step, and I've asked this in interviews of candidates before, what was the decision or what were the decisions or some of the factors that made you move from one job to another, and really taking stock of what those are, because you get smarter every time you make a decision, and every time you make a career move, you should, hopefully. And sometimes we can backslide, and that's okay. But learning from each of those to say, okay, now how do I take this to the next step? And how do I take this to the next step? And really thinking about how you're building your portfolio. It's your own personal portfolio that you're building at the end of the day. What do you want it to look like?
Look, you mentioned backsliding. I just think, like, sometimes it's not going to work out. You're going to take the risk and it's not going to work out.
Yeah, and that's fine.
But if you're doing this right, it's okay if it doesn't work out. You then pivot again.
You pivot and you learn. And then you say, okay, what's next for my portfolio? I learned this from this opportunity. I learned what type of environment isn't conducive to my being my best self in the workplace. Yeah. Now I'm going to take that learning and move it to this one really is. And this is what I'm now going to look for when I look for the next opportunity. Totally okay.
That was Dr. Minter-Jordan, CEO of AARP, a physician and a former healthcare executive. Now, if you are a LinkedIn Premium member and you want to hear the extended version of this conversation, head over to the link in the show notes. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thanks so much for joining. I'll see you right back here next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Ava Ahmedbegi and Rachel Karp. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gedron. The show is mixed by Tim Boland. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.